Hey everybody, Robin from Backscatter here.
Jim from Backscatter here.
And we are here to talk about the new OM Systems 90mm macro lens. You might also know OM Systems as Olympus, the former brand name. We already did a quick review on this lens back when it first came out, where we dove into all the tech specs and what makes it cool. But at the time, we didn't really have a chance to actually shoot it underwater. But Jim, we just got back from an epic trip where you nailed some awesome macro shots with this thing. So we want to talk about, again, kind of what really makes this lens cool and what went into pulling off these shots underwater. So I'm going to ask you all about its ability to do 2-to-1 macro, how well the autofocus worked, whether you were able to use focus peaking or not, and if you actually went all the way and stuck some diopters on top of that thing to go beyond the limits of the lens. So what do you say we get into it, huh?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
One of the coolest things about this lens is that it can shoot up to 2-to-1 macro on its own without the need for a diopter, but that's not all that it's good for either. So why don't you tell me about how you used it and how far could you push this lens to its limit?
Great question, Robin. So with this, yes, you can do up to 2-to-1 macro, but there's actually a switch on this lens for 3 different ranges of macro photography. So the first one that I used was the full range switch to infinity, which actually goes from about 0.25 to infinity. I'm just looking at the lens here for that. And what I did was I was shooting a fairy basslet here, fairly large one. I needed to put it back to that position on the switch because I needed to back up pretty far because it gives me a lot of working distance in order to get that picture. Then what I did was I was shooting a smaller fairy bass, a little bit smaller, so it was getting a little bit tighter. And on that one, I needed to put it into the second position on the switch, which will get me from about 1/2 meter down to about 1-to-1 reproduction ratio. Here's the thing, when you're autofocusing, if you're squarely within the range of where that switch is for the distance, because remember, focus is distance. If you're squarely in that range, then what happens is the lens snaps to focus really quickly and does an excellent job. Thing is, when you're on that edge of where you might drift a little bit closer or a little bit further away from where the position on the switch is, that's when the lens will hunt. But that is a function of any lens where you have a limit switch like this that you'll need to be aware of, I think, a little bit more than you normally would on, let's say, the 60mm macro, or if you're coming from a full frame mirrorless or SLR.
Okay, yeah. So then what about clicking it into the third switch position?
Yeah, third switch position, that'll get you down to 2-to-1 macro. And so when you do that, it'll still autofocus pretty well up until you get to 2-to-1. But again, you have to be within the range of that as well. And so I have this example shot here of this sailfin blenny, where it's a kind of a head and body shot of it. And I was somewhere between 1-to-1 and 2-to-1. And it's picked up real easy on the eye, on the body, that whole area. Locked on, tracked, autofocus on it, excellent. So that's what I was able to do with that. I know it was between 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 because I used the 1-to-1 switch, and then it wasn't focused well. I snapped it over to 2-to-1. Then I could focus in that range between those 2 magnifications.
And even at that tightest position, in the third switch position, autofocus still working pretty well for you?
Yes, as long as I was within the range of what the switch was set on, then it worked great.
Fantastic. So let's talk about going even crazier than 2-to-1 on this thing. You actually put on some diopters and shot at greater than 2-to-1 with this lens. Tell me about that.
Yes, I did. I was like, I got them, why not try them?
Yeah.
I know it's 2-to-1 is pretty crazy to begin with, but then getting greater that is can be challenging as well. With this particular camera, I was using a 12.5 diopter, plus 12.5, and I used it on the same blenny. So when you look at this other shot of the blenny, you can see that I've got the eye and the mouth in, and that's all I could fit in there. And this is uncropped. Also, what happens is the depth of field drops quite a bit. So take a look at the mouth and the eye of the blenny, look just behind that, and you see the focus just fades out really, really quick. But the detail that you get is insane.
And so how are you actually able to pull that off? Like, that seems so crazy to shoot. What kind of tools are you able to use to do that?
Well, first off, if you want to shoot the maximum magnification of this lens, you need to use manual focus.
Okay.
And that's what I did with that particular sailfin blenny shot. I also have a series of shots that I did with a Shaun the Sheep nudibranch where I used the 2-to-1 with no diopter, a +5, and a +12.5. And so the reason I know that it's at 2-to-1 because 2-to-1 happens at minimum focus distance of the lens. So I took the lens and just set it to minimum focus, and then I moved in until the subjects were in focus, and then I took the picture. Then I did the same thing where +5, I put that in, then moved in a little bit closer to achieve final focus, and then I again did that with this +12.5 on the Shaun the Sheep as well.
So were you using focus peaking to like ensure that the eye was sharp, or how'd you pull it off?
Exactly. There's no eye on that particular nudibranch.
Sure.
Eye spots. I know we've been called out for that before.
Right.
Doesn't have eyes, has an eye spot. What I did for it, I set up focus peaking so that I could assign it to a button on the camera. I was shooting the OM1 camera, so I shot it on the AEL button. I assigned that to be focus peaking on/off. Because the normal operation in a Olympus or OM camera is when you turn the focus dial on the lens, focus peaking becomes active, and then after a couple seconds, it goes away. Well, if you're doing this thing where you're pushing in, because remember, focus is distance, so if I move the camera to the minimum distance, then it'll be in focus. What I do to see when that happens is I can turn peaking on and off, and that can be done in the menu for the switch. And that's how I know I was at 2-to-1 and got the maximum reproduction ratio possible out of the camera.
So what kind of other challenges did you have when shooting through those diopters? I mean, focus peaking must make the job easier, but it couldn't be that easy, right?
It was definitely difficult. With 2-to-1, it wasn't too bad as far as difficulty level. The big thing with the Shaun the Sheep, it was kind of on the move on this little tiny leaf that it was on, so I had to keep repositioning myself. But at 2-to-1, I was able to move the camera in, see it, focus peaking pretty easily. If there's a little bit of current that came along, it would kind of push the rhinophores up so that the rhinophores and the front part of the nudibranch would both be in focus. So that wasn't too bad. The challenges came, bigger challenges, especially when I added the diopter in, because then the depth of field drops a lot more when you add those things in. And so I was able to do it with the +5. Luckily, there's enough of a current that came along to kind of fluff the rhinophores back up, so it was in a position where it was in the same plane of focus as the front end of the nudibranch. But then when I was shooting the +12.5 diopter, the depth of field was so thin, it was like a tip of the rhinophore would be in, but the rest of it would be out. So I didn't really get a great shot of it. I kind of split the difference on trying to find the focus for it. So the rhinophores in that shot are a little bit out, and the front of the nudibranch is a little bit out, but that was the best that I could do with that. But in all three of these images you can see together, you can see how much tighter it gets and the more magnification you get, because these are uncropped out of camera. So this is what you see is what you get here. When you check out this isopod shot, you can see here that there's only a single point of focus. I don't have like two rhinophores moving around that are front of a nudibranch. I gotta try and line up three things. I need to just line up one thing for this particular guy here, and that's just the eye. So it was a lot easier to pull this shot off with the 12.5 diopter with the lens set at 2-to-1. As you can see, there's a consequence. I get some of the legs that are in focus as well, but then you see the front end of it as a little bit soft. It starts going into a bokeh, and then the back end of it really fades out into a nice bokeh. But these things we're talking about, this guy is like, grain of rice kind of size.
All this sounds awesome, but there's gotta be some drawbacks to this thing. So what other kind of caveats or other general challenges did you face when using this lens? Like, what can't it do well?
Well, I'd say that the thing it can't do well is fish portrait type shots where you have like a larger kind of fish and you're filling the frame with that fish. The reason is kind of twofold. Number one, because this is a 90mm lens on a micro four thirds sensor body, the angle of coverage is going to be a lot less than what you have with a 90mm lens on a full frame. The angle coverage is so much more on the full frame cameras with this. It's just the nature of going to a crop sensor. So what happens is your working distance increases. So as you back up for something, you'll be able to actually get it in view. But if you're doing fish portrait, especially something a little bit larger, you have to back up so far where you'd be feet away from the subject, and it's hard to get light onto it. You're shooting through a lot of water. So it's not really meant for those types of shots. You're better off sticking with like the Olympus 60mm macro, or even for larger fish ports, maybe the Olympus 14 to 42 millimeter lens. That will work well for those types of shots.
I mean, that being said, totally understandable for fish portraits, but something we talked about a lot in part 1 was how having that extra working distance for some subjects is actually quite a benefit too. So a bit of a pro and a con there.
Yeah, so for macro size subjects, anything approaching small, like nudibranch size on downwards, this gives you lots of working distance, which has a couple benefits. Number one, if you're working with a critter that isn't tolerant of your presence too much, having more working distance, the critter's not going to take off on you, number one. The second thing is when you get into those super macro magnification levels, you still have a decent amount of working distance to fit your lighting in. If you're trying to do super macro with a 60mm lens, you're so close to things that it's extremely difficult to get any lighting in there whatsoever. And if you come from a TG6, you know exactly what I'm talking about when you're trying to do super macro. This lens will do more macro magnification than the Olympus TG6, also at a much further distance away. So it is a lot easier to pull off those super macro shots with this particular rig because of the extra working distance you have. But that being said, the trade-off is you can't really do larger fish portrait type shots with this particular lens.
Jim, you've got me excited to take this out for my next macro dive. Sounds like pretty much anybody with a micro 4/3 camera that's into macro needs to be excited about this too. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, I was shooting this on an OM1, their top end camera here, but this lens will work on any of the Pens or the OMD system cameras. If you're been bit by the bug of macro madness and you got a TG6, this is a great upgrade path to get even more macro and actually have it be easier as well.
Right on. Thank you very much for sharing your shots with us and breaking down everything that goes into pulling off the shot with this lens. Remember, if you want to learn more, we do have part 1 of this review. We'll leave a link down in the video description. And you can help us keep making more of these videos by buying your underwater photo and video gear from us here at Backscatter. Every purchase always includes free lifetime tech support. We ship internationally every day, and we actually dive, shoot, and service everything we sell. I'm Robin from Backscatter, signing off.
I'm Jim from Backscatter, signing off.
And we'll catch you on the next one.